Welcome to the Cinematic Flashback Podcast. Get ready to hop into the Wayback Machine as we journey through the wild, bold, and unforgettable films of the 1970s. Each episode will break down a classic movie or a forgotten gem by exploring the who's who of each film, diving into the premise and plot, see how it performed then and now, and wrap things up with, did it groove through the decades or lose its beat? I am your host, Chuck Bryan. Joining me, of course, is my good friend and co-host, Matt Sargent. Matt, the Super Bowl was this past Sunday. Did you watch it?
Oh, I certainly did. But when I don't have a team in the game, like you, I think I watch mainly for the commercials. The wind was taken out of my sails a little bit when the Commanders lost.
I really think that everybody wanted to see the Bills and the Commanders.
That would have been amazing.
By the way, word is getting out, and I've been getting a lot of great feedback on our Dirty Harry episode, and it just might end up being as popular as the French Connection.
I really think that our best episode so far possibly was the Breaking Away one, but that's only because I recommended that film.
And you had a personal connection with that one.
Yes, very much so.
Have you seen those Topps trading cards that have been going out?
Yeah, those look great. Good job on those. They're fun. I think we should have some of those printed up as real handouts, and then we can do some giveaways and also give them to all our friends and really print them like they look like on cardstock. I think it wouldn't be that expensive, and I would definitely go halvesies with you. It would be fun.
That's an excellent idea, and what a great promotion. I was thinking about doing some stickers or something like that, but I honestly like that idea of the trading cards.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Something different, and people would hold on to them, and then you have your, we could do whatever to advertise the podcast. You can put a little tiny QR code on the back in the corner or something.
I did realize after we released Kelly's Heroes that Gene Hackman's birthday came up. And so I don't know if you noticed, but I put Gene Hackman on the gold foil.
Nice. Gene Hackman is a treasure. He's been in so many films and done so many roles. I'm really a big fan of his. As you know, I'm also a big fan of Donald Sutherland. Big fan, but treasures.
One more thing before we move on. There's a Facebook group that I talk about constantly called Cinema of the 70s. Did I send you an invite for that?
You didn't. I'd love to be on that, though.
Oh, okay. I will send that to you today. This is a really great group because I can go in and put in a picture or something and then ask for feedback on a movie and what they really thought about it. I thought that it was really great to see both what people liked about the film and what they didn't like about it. Thanks to everyone out there on that group who helped me get my thoughts straight about this film. Today we are covering 1977 John Frankenheimer's political thriller Black Sunday, based on Thomas Harris' novel of the same name. When a Black September terrorist group begins a plot to carry out a massive terrorist attack in the United States, an Israeli commando works with the FBI to identify the target and conspirators and prevent the plan from succeeding. Let's have a listen to the trailer.
People of America, this situation is unbearable for us. Until you understand that and stop helping the Israelis with arms and money, we of the Black September movement will make it unbearable for you. Today's horror is nothing to what will happen unless your government acts now. We have begun the year for you with bloodshed.
If you do not help me, you may have on your hands the blood of a great many innocent Americans.
Just a minute, sweetie. I'm getting something for you.
Her name is Dahlia Iyad, of Arab-German extraction. Black September joined in 1973. You know, for 30 years I have been killing and murdering. What have I achieved?
I am your superior in the organization, and you will obey orders.
You may be my superior in the organization, but you are not a woman.
The day we set the big one off, we're only going to be 100 feet off the ground, right over the 50-yard line. Now look at this. That means 222,000 darts in the kill zone for 80,000 people.
Pat Summerall with Tom Brookshire. And Tom, you can feel the pressure building up all week. So here we go. Super Bowl is underway.
Corley to stadium, Corley to stadium.
Signal red alert. Get the president out of the stadium. All right, we're going to shoot the thing down.
You can't shoot it down. It's filled with helium.
If anything happens to me, you use this on the backup fuse. Black Sunday. It could be tomorrow.
This was a first-time watch for me, and all I knew about the film were the print ads showing the blimp crashing into the Super Bowl. Overall, I thought the film delivered on the promises of the advertisement. There was a blimp, and it did go to the Super Bowl. What about you, Matt?
I have a bit of a unique view on this. I did read the book before I saw the movie way back when. So I compare things to the book a little bit. I think the other thing that was interesting about the film is it was live at the Super Bowl. That was the first time and the last time the NFL ever allowed any such thing to happen. The other thing was interesting is that Goodyear allowed them access to the actual blimp.
That made a difference in how this film felt.
Yeah, I agree. One of the interesting things is in our area that we live in, down in North Carolina, near the inland waterway, is a blimp hangar. And when you go down that area and you look over the water, you see this gigantic building. I mean, it's absolutely huge. And you're like, what is that? And they park space stations in there or something. It's a blimp hangar from way back when they used to hangar blimps there to go out over the ocean during World War II to see if their ships or submarines out there and stuff.
Are we ready to get into it?
I think so.
Goggles on, please.
Lights, camera, action!
Then remove your goggles.
Black Sunday was a 1977 adaptation of Thomas Harris's first book, distributed by Paramount Pictures and produced by the Robert Evans Company. This film is about Mossad agents who are hunting down a Palestinian group called Black September, who have plans to carry out terrorist actions on U.S. soil. When the agents raid the group's compound, they kill everyone except for a woman who was confronted while she was in the shower. Unknown to the lead agent, a man named Kabakov, played by Robert Shaw, this is Dahlia, Marthe Keller, the mastermind behind the plot. She is using former POW American pilot Mike Lander, played by Bruce Dern, to carry out her plans. Lander, who is now a freelance pilot for Goodyear to fly their blimp at NFL games, has lost everything when he was released from Vietnam. He was court-martialed, his wife left him, and he has nothing to lose and wants nothing more than to make a memorable end to his life. Matt, you said you read the book. Did it feature Hannibal Lecter?
I had no idea that that was the same author. And I have to admit, I read this when I was 15, 16 years old. So I read it in like 1975 or 6 or something.
The expectations for this movie was at the same level as Jaws. It made $15.7 million against a budget of $8 million.
So
it made money. And maybe not as much money as they were hoping for.
Jaws was a very personal terror film, right? One person in the water, a shark in the water, one person. You could definitely put your mind into that. Sadly, the idea of this thing trying to attack thousands and thousands of people attending the Super Bowl, people are like, yeah, I'd never go to the Super Bowl. This probably wouldn't affect me.
Black Sunday floated into the theaters on April 1st, 1977. It had a runtime of 2 hours and 23 minutes with an R rating, and it opened about 54 days prior to Star Wars.
Well, there's part of it then.
Right. The film was directed by legendary director John Frankenheimer, best known for such films as Birdman of Alcatraz, The Manchurian Candidate, and 7 Days in May.
I have seen The Birdman of Alcatraz. I think I've seen The Manchurian Candidate, but I don't remember 7 Days in May.
Music was composed by John Williams. The complete soundtrack was not released until January 2010. And at the time, this was the only John Williams score that had not been released.
As usual, I defer most of the music review and sort of interest. I enjoy it, but I don't know it nearly as well as you. I know you're quite the aficionado with the music and all of that. So I always enjoy getting that information from you, and I appreciate it. I can agree with you that the musical score definitely added a lot to the action.
That's primarily the main role of music in a movie. It's not a visual medium, so it works with trying to connect with your emotions of the film. So if you don't even recognize it, but you look back and go, man, that was a really exciting scene. Well, the music in that scene was probably really good, even though you may not have acknowledged that was the reason for it. So I was listening to an interview with the editor of Alien, And he was talking about when he first received the raw film to put together of the scene where Harry Dean Stanton is looking for his cat, and he's in this one section of the ship that just has a whole bunch of chains. The scene didn't have any sound effects. It didn't have any music in it. And he's like, okay, this scene is kind of bland. But once it got cut together and then the sound effects are added and then the music is laid on top of it, it sometimes is hard for us to remember that most of what we experience in a movie is what goes into it in post-production.
Come on, baby. Come on.
I remember that scene where he's looking for the cat and you are at the edge of your seat.
I have Alien on our schedule to talk about as we get closer to Halloween.
Good deal.
Black Sunday stars Robert Shaw as Kabakov, and of course he had just come off of Jaws. Bruce Dern played Mike Lander. His previous film was in Silent Running. That was a Douglas Trumbull directed film. Marthe Keller was Dahlia, and she previously was in Marathon Man. And Fritz Weaver played Sam Corley, the FBI agent. What did you think of this casting?
I think there was some misses here, to be honest with you. I'm shocked that Robert Shaw had just done Jaws, because if you look at Robert Shaw in Jaws, he's this grizzled old guy who looks like he's 20 years older than the guy you see in this movie. But also, I just got to say, that accent was so hard to understand who that guy was in the movie. You know, is he a British agent working with the Israelis?
One of the things about this film that stands out is the companies and the corporations that allowed this film to use their logos. You had mentioned earlier that the director had built a relationship with Goodyear, and they allowed him to use their blimp with conditions. So the first condition was Goodyear blimp pilots are Goodyear employees. Mike Lander needed to work for another company that supplied pilots. So in other words, the main villain of the film could not be an employee of Goodyear blimp. Next, nobody could get killed by the blimp directly. So that kind of means that we weren't going to see anybody getting hit by the propellers or anything like that. The last condition was the Goodyear logo could be used in the movie, but not in print advertisements. So if you look at the poster for this, it says Super Bowl instead of Goodyear.
That's funny. And I think those conditions are actually pretty reasonable. I don't know if you remember, but the Goodyear blimp lived very large in our lives during the 70s because most football stadiums were open topped. So if you went to a major football game and it was going to be covered by the blimp, which was basically the substitute for what we have now are the flying robot cameras. Right? Mm-hmm. It was the view from above. You could see how plays evolved because there was a cameraman pointing straight down. Well, nowadays, you know, as more and more stadiums were covered over, the reason for the Goodyear blimp kind of really lost a lot. It just ended up being a thing you flew around a closed stadium with for advertisement.
I remember as a kid, I lived near an airport, and every now and then the Goodyear blimp would fly by, and the neatest thing, and they kind of showed it in the movie, was they had lights on the side of it, and they could do messages. And I remember them having Merry Christmas, and they would do the little Christmas trees kind of go by. So
I remember, I have that exact same memory because we lived outside of Washington D.C. If the Redskin, back then it was the Redskins, not the Commanders, were going to have a game covered because RFK was an open stadium. And it was over in Landover, Maryland. So they sort of had to fly basically across the country, right across where we lived. And our whole family would be like, the blimp. We go running out there.
Yeah. It was actually an event.
It was a huge event.
That.
Yeah, it was like everybody in the neighborhood was out to see the blimp. And because it didn't go by very fast.
No. As we'll see in the climax of this movie, it doesn't move very fast.
In this film, the owner of the Miami Dolphins worked very, very closely with the NFL to allow filming at the actual Super Bowl 10. Now, there was some filming done at other NFL games, which is also remarkable. Those were mostly crowd shots and B-roll, but the shots that actually showed players coming on the field and on the field was the actual Super Bowl. So you get to see people like Roger Staubach and who else was out there?
Terry Bradshaw.
Yeah.
During the game, you see Lynn Swann's fabulous touchdown catch.
That's right.
What's really interesting, that stampede and the chaos that happens at the climax of the film, it was filmed the day after the Super Bowl, and the United Way provided a ton of extras for no charge in exchange for Frankenheimer directing a short film for them with Robert Shaw narrating.
Oh, that's amazing. What a great way to do it. I think another notable thing is the Pittsburgh Steelers beat Dallas Cowboys 21-17. The game was played on January 18th, 1976 and aired on the CBS network. A little interesting tidbit is Jimmy Carter was sworn in as president on January 20th, 1977. So it would have been difficult for him to attend the Super Bowl 10.
Now, that was a double for Jimmy Carter. It was extremely convincing.
Oh, was it? Because I thought it was him.
Yeah. If they had Jimmy Carter as the president, Frankenheimer was actually predicting who going to win the presidency, and between Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter.
Maybe they recorded it with both extras, and then after the fact, they put in the right president.
You know what? You're probably right.
That's what I would have done.
Probably right. That makes more sense to me than someone picking a side. Speaking of Frankenheimer, he actually had a cameo as the CBS director that yells at Kabakov to get out of the production trailer.
That's funny.
I think I sent you a picture. The second time I was watching it, I noticed that.
I love those little, what do we call those? Easter eggs in software engineering, little things that you can uncover. These are Easter eggs in the filming, the inside baseball stuff that's if the actors are watching or showing, hey, there's the director. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Look how terrible he is as an actor.
Hitchcock was famous for always making a cameo.
Yeah, but he was so unique looking that it was not exactly an Easter egg. It was kind of obvious, right? So
my favorite was him as the man in the white outfit in Psycho.
Yeah.
The minute he walked out the door, it's like, oh, there he is. Do we have anything else on production or trivia?
I don't think so. Let's move on.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It smells like victory.
Let's talk about what we liked about this film. What you got?
Well, as you know, and we spoke about this before, I'm not as enamored with this film, but I do know there was some good points. I think the opening scenes are filmed in such a way to really give you that kind of a feeling of a documentary being filmed. You don't really know what's going to happen. I think one of the techniques that the director used, which I also find was very nice, was he didn't tell the extras a lot about what was about to happen in the scene. He did that on purpose to try to capture a realistic surprise or reaction from the extras. I think that was very effective. I think people, if told what's going to happen, will either underact or overact. And I think he was able to catch that. So that's a couple of things I thought were great.
I really like John Williams. His music elevated the action scenes in the movie. We already talked about the authenticity of having corporations like Goodyear and the NFL. They're very protective of their brands today. So you would not see this, as you pointed out. For example, 2002's Sum of All Fears featured an attack on the Super Bowl, and they had to use fictional teams because the NFL in no way, shape, or form wanted to be associated with terrorism post 9/11. Then you have 2007's Transformers, and while they are using real car brands, it feels more like a commercial.
I agree with that. I did mention this a little bit, and I'll just go into a little more, that there was a realistic thriller vibe to it. That's what he was going for. You have the what I would call the rampant not use of steady cams.
Oh.
So you have shaky video, like somebody's holding a video camera. It's not leading the action, I think this term. They're following the action, which means they're kind of like we don't know what's going to happen next. We might be not pointed in exactly the right direction and have to whip the camera over to what's something that's happening, much like a real person who's filming something that's happening would do, right? They're like, I don't know what's going to happen.
So you're not talking about that handheld realistic feel that we were talking about when we talked about the French Connection, right? Kind of, it felt more documentary. This felt more produced.
I don't know. I found it, I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I'll tell you what I felt truly was it was a little bit distracting. It was a little too much, where I think the French Connection gave you just enough. This one was, I think, overboard, because at some points I'm like, I can't even follow what's happening because the camera's shaking so much. Now I'm very sensitive to that sort of motion input. I get seasick really, really easily. I get seasick on a swing set. So when the camera starts to shake like that, it'll totally distract me. I might even have to look away from the screen. So when I sense that, that's distracting to me. In fact, in big movies, if they pan the camera too fast, I can see the flashing of the scenes, and it drives me crazy. So that's another one that I'm super sensitive about. So that may just be me.
I really liked John Frankenheimer. This is the earliest film that I've seen of his. The other one that I remember from the 80s was called 52 Pickups with Roy Scheider. I went to see that movie because of him. And I think Anne Margaret was the co-star in that film. And of course, I've heard of Manchurian Candidate and also The Birdman of Alcatraz.
I'll let you talk about Bruce Dern.
Okay. My last like was Bruce Dern. He's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Where I really started to like him was later in his movie Nebraska. For me, this performance that he gave as Lander, it was very manic depressive. So one moment he's your best friend, the next moment he's unhinged and he's pointing a shotgun at you. And you just know that any moment he's going to go off. So I felt a little uneasy whenever he was on because I just wasn't sure which version of him was going to show up in the scene. Did you have any other likes that you wanted to talk about?
Not particularly. I'm good. Generally, I liked the film. We'll talk about my other feelings in what we didn't like about the film.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here?
There are some things in this film that just didn't work for me. How about you?
I agree. There's several, and I think I may have more than you.
Okay.
I would say, and I know we both agree on this, that Robert Shaw, I think, was miscast in this role.
Yeah.
I think he's a great actor. Don't get me wrong. I'm not reflecting on his acting ability, but to me, it was a really hard stretch, and it was not successful in a lot of ways. I think he needed to be slightly younger. He needed to be clearly Israeli. He needed to be much more driven for the cause. At parts in the movie, he's kind of lukewarm about chasing the bad guys until some things happen.
Here's my confusion. I see Robert Shaw show up in the opening scene. He's a commando on one of those commando boats that's pulling up. My first thought is, okay, he's a British commando. You start hearing him talk, and I'm not really sure what his accent was supposed to be. Even once I realized that he's Israeli. Do you remember Kevin Costner in that Robin Hood film where at some point he just threw away the entire British accent altogether?
Yeah.
It reminded me of that as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think just the other part of miscasting is I just don't think he sold Israeli Mossad hard-boiled commando of incredible sort of down and dirty fighting like that's who would be chasing this person. You have to be super smart to figure out a lot of this stuff. And to me, he was always, and maybe it's the way the book's written a little bit, he's about a pace or two behind anything that's happening. The idea that he let the protagonist, the most evil person, go in the first scenes is just ridiculous, but that's part of the writing. That's not Robert Shaw's problem.
Yeah, it's funny because this movie would have been over around 8 minutes into the film had he just simply shot Dahlia in the shower at the very beginning. This whole film would not have taken place.
Or just thrown her in jail, and that would have worked as well.
Oh, sure. There was another character in that raid compound who got out with her who shows up later on in Miami. They have a long shootout with him in the streets.
So I think we also mentioned it. The pacing is a little odd. There's
Oh.
some parts that are really fast, and there's some that take forever. And in the closing scenes, the idea that the blimp's going to go over the Super Bowl and then return to base for a contrived problem, which is very hard to do with just a few people in.
Oh,
it was like, that's
So we
that wasn't
and we
great.
already talked. We talked about in real life that the blimp is a slow moving vehicle, and
You could barely make it to the
I
parking
felt
lot
like
and back.
I felt like it was the same thing where you're watching it and it's like it's coming, oh no, it's got to go back. Oh,
Hopefully no wind comes up. Anyway, yeah. So that was a little weird. I think you have one in here. I think I really
As a modern movie watcher, and I have to put it in that context, seeing this film for the first time, I thought the effects were awful. Like the rear projection when they're in the gondola, and there's this one scene where Kopikov is coming down on the rope, and the stunt man was fantastic.
Yes.
But then it switches to a miniature, and it's like a little doll, like they put on a rope and went boop, and it hits the side, and it's so obviously like a little action figure. I watched it a couple of times, and I just had to rewind it and go, wait a minute, did I just see that? Right? And it's funny, in the credits you look at it, and there's only one person who was in charge of the special effects, and he's credited as the special effects man. Just one guy. Star Wars is about to come out. I mean, we had a lot more technology back then, and I really thought that the effects were a deterrent to the film. I want to say that's me as a modern movie watcher.
I don't know. I think what we're witnessing here, and I think we hit it before, and this is one of the things I probably have a problem with the film. This looks like a audience grab after Jaws, right?
No
you have
doubt.
one of the stars from Jaws in it. You're trying to get those movie people in the seats, and you throw this thing out there, and we don't have a lot of time to work with real special effects. So we're just going to throw some miniatures and a doll on a string. And remember, old theaters had giant screens.
Oh, yeah.
So what we were watching, where the doll was 2 inches long on our screen, it was like 10 feet tall or something in the movie theater. It had to be ridiculous. That was a miss for me as well.
You talked about the blimp moving very slowly. I thought the plot took forever to unfold, and it was a little bit convoluted, like trying to figure out how everything fit together, which means that on my second watch, once I knew where everything was going, it worked a little bit better. But, a movie shouldn't rely on you watching it twice. It should be pretty much clear as to everything that's going on.
Yeah, I know we talked about before about how the dumbing down of audiences in the modern age, where they sort of tell you everything and lay it out very clearly. This could have used a little of that. I'll be honest with you. I watched this over 3 days. I fell asleep every time and had to rewind and go back. And honestly, for a movie that's supposed to be a thriller, that's not a vote of confidence in it, really. It was, and I think part of it was you really had to follow some of this convoluted complex. There's a lot talking about getting the plastic explosives into the country, and there's a whole subplot about the smugglers and the speedboat and all of that spent a bunch of time with it. Just been, we smuggled some plastic explosive into the country, done. Right? I don't need to know all.
The speedboat chase scene was,
again, I think that
it was superfluous.
It was a grab for thrills, and it was a whole section that could have been cut out. But clearly they spent a lot of money filming this nighttime boat chase. I'm sorry. It's just, they would have found the boat. They would have found the boat, after the next day. They would have been able to get fingerprints off. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just, to me, it was just silly. They could have had a helicopter in the air following the boat, right? Where's the helicopter? They're chasing them with only places loaded with helicopters. You just get on the radio. The Coast Guard puts a helicopter up.
And somehow Mike Lander times out the crossing and the lowering of the rail bridge right at the perfect time.
That might work for European audiences where the trains are on time. But in the United States, forget about it. If it's within a couple of hours of when it was supposed to cross, thumbs up.
I like Bruce Dern. You didn't have the same reaction.
No, I don't like Bruce Dern as an actor. I don't think he's a great actor. I think he always plays this character, which says he's maybe always playing himself. I don't know. I just didn't like him in this role. I think certainly you wanted to have somebody in this role that was showing instability, but I think what they should have shown somebody with huge intelligence, instability, and, a deep-seated revenge. And what this guy was portrayed as, and partly it's the writing, but partly it's how he portrayed it, was a sniveling person who's mad about his wife leaving him and him being treated badly after the Vietnam War. It's like, welcome to all the veterans from the Vietnam War. They were all treated like junk, terribly, right? Everybody was. Even the POWs were treated terribly. So yeah, it's terrible. But the idea that guy would be anywhere near flying somebody's blimp, I'm sorry. That's just unrealistic. Yeah. If we're talking about Bruce Dern in general, I just thought, I get it. You're trying to play a manic depressive person, but it was not a great performance in my opinion. But you liked it, so more power to you.
Let me ask you this. So you don't like Bruce Dern. Do you like his daughter, Laura Dern?
Yeah, she's okay. I think she's a bit one-dimensional as well.
Okay, so it runs in the family.
Yeah, she's also very odd.
Okay. Well, we've talked about our likes. We've talked about our dislikes. Let's get into our favorite scenes.
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me. Who's got you?
There are some really good scenes in this film to talk about. Let's open it up with the opening of the film in Beirut.
Dahlia was concerned about security.
No. I was concerned at the lack of trust. I know 100 times more about that man than any piece of film. I want that film destroyed.
Enough.
As for the man Lander, you will have to take my word. He lives for it. After all, it was he who approached us.
Are you convinced about him? Can you control him?
To a degree. To the degree you can't control a child, a brilliant child. He doubts. Oh, he is dangerous.
Now, tell him what projectiles the American is planning to use and how many.
220,000 steel rifle darts.
Rifle darts. Interesting. With inertial velocity of 600 meters per second.
That's right.
Striking where it hurts them most. Where they feel most at home.
Dahlia, I think Nagawa would like to get down to technical requirements.
No, please. Go on. Go on, comrade.
We are going to make a broadcast to the world on that day. I shall give the American people their state of the nation.
This scene introduces Dahlia as being a little bit at odds with the leader of her organization because he does not like Lander and he thinks that it's incredibly risky having this whole operation depend on someone who's as unstable as this man is. However, Dahlia believes in him, that he's the right person to carry out the operation.
I think one of the salient points of that was that the argument about that Bruce Dern character is that he's not a believer. He's doing it for ulterior motives, and that's what the other leader says is unstable. We don't know what's really driving him. He's not a true believer. She says she's going to be able to control him because she's going to control him, which,
Ultimately, I don't think she's able to.
He's too frenetic.
Ooh, frenetic. That's probably the best description of Mike Lander in this film.
For sure. The next scene that I would say is one of the best scenes is the testing of the weapon.
It's panoramic,
Is that right? Mm-hmm. You know it's pretty dark in here. Has that thing got a flash on it?
Sure does.
Hey, if you like, I could stand over here like this.
Give it some scale. Hey, that'd really be terrific. I tell you what, why don't you, here, put your hand up like that, put the pipe in the mouth. Oh, darling, doesn't he look great? All right, just little guys, just hold that pose for 1 second.
I'm ready. When are you gonna shoot?
Symmetrical!
Michael!
On both sides!
Please, let's not stay around here too long, please.
Look at this, it works. Look, darling, look at this!
Michael, please, let's
go! God damn it, you're gonna look at this. We're not going anyplace. Now look, now study that, look at that. That's brilliant, Starling. What are you talking about going? Look at that! We deserve this moment, sweetheart. Don't you understand something? When we set off the big one, we're both going with it. Look at this.
There had been an argument with the Dahlia character about testing, and he insisted on testing.
Oh, yeah.
She was not convinced about testing. And then later you see them go to this really remote airstrip. I think they thought it was going to be abandoned, but there was actually a guy there. And they talked the guy into standing in front of this new type of camera. And then they go off. They perform the tests. And at that point, you see the test is 100% successful. But the really disturbing part of that scene is that Mike Lander is just over the moon. He doesn't care that there's a dude on the ground, literally cut the shreds from his thing.
Right.
But they do show the wall that the weapon was pointed at is just riddled with tiny little holes, and they're all absolutely uniform, which is what he was trying to do, which is the whole point of this weapon is to shoot these little flechettes out into the crowd in a very uniform spot so everybody gets a few of them, which is just horrific to think about. But the real weird part of the scene is that he's just so happy that this thing succeeds. He just doesn't even care that this dude is just dead.
He says something along the lines about how this is our only time to look at how perfect this is, because we're going to go with it when all this happens. We'll be dead because we'll be just like this poor guy who's laying here on the ground.
Right, yeah.
You see him earlier packing this fiberglass shell with plastic explosives and little flechettes. They look like nails when he's working with it. So you're not really sure how this bomb works.
I will say, though, that one of the problems I have with that scene is the way they had to show those little holes coming through the wall is they had to have the sun behind that wall coming through. But if you look at the setup of that scene, the plane is on the absolute other side of that wall. That plane would have been dissolved with the same flechettes. But not only that, they were standing out there when they shot the bomb off. I was like, it looks like you're standing in the cone. I think one of the scenes that you really enjoyed was Bruce Dern's The Shadow in the Picture.
It was this scene that swung me over to liking Bruce Dern's performance. And sometimes all it takes is a scene.
I loved her. My last Christmas in captivity. They allowed me one letter from Margaret, and in it was a photograph of Margaret and the kids standing in front of the house. And the shadow of the person that took the picture was in the foreground, and it was wide, and it fell on their legs. And all I could think about was who took the picture. I spent more time looking at the shadow than I did at my own wife or kids.
He's sharing with Dahlia about his experience of being held captive and finding out that the military had spoken with his wife, telling her when he comes back, you're going to need to be prepared that he's going to be different. And Lander remembers in Vietnam, the last Christmas, he got a picture from her taken in front of their house, and then he could see the shadow of the person who was taking it. And he just starts fixating on whose shadow was that in the picture.
I think it was an absolutely effective way in the writing to show the guy obsessing on something. They're allowing him one and only one picture to hold on to, and he can do nothing but look at the shadow of the person that's taking the picture. And of course, his mind jumps to that it's another man or it's something else. I also remember in part of this movie, you can see how ineffective the VA was portrayed as being these hugely long lines to have a personal interview with your counselor, who clearly doesn't even know that you're divorced from your wife.
You get to see the children, though.
No, sir, I don't get to see my children.
But you have visitation rights.
Mr. Pugh, my children are very small. They don't know much about my rights.
Look, I'm sorry. Sit down, Captain. My predecessor, Gorman, left very few notes, I'm afraid. Well, listen, let me get some of this down. When were you divorced, Captain?
She filed 1 month after my release.
wouldn't know either. I've heard of inefficiencies in that organization, and that's how this film depicted that in this case. How about that Super Bowl climax?
I think that was great. It was cool that they actually were using a real Super Bowl, but in terms of pacing, it lacked something. It should have been a nice, steady build to a giant release, and it sort of was a very slow creep up a small hill and then back down and then a small hill and then a bigger hill and then finally it ended. It was a little long.
There is a point in the film where the blimp has to turn around to go back to the airfield so that they can load the bomb on. How did they handle that in the book?
In the book, the bomb was really a very thin sort of shell that they had attached to the blimp, and it was already there. It was super light. That was the whole point of using that different plastic explosive. They don't ever really go into that, but the point was they could use a lot less of it for weight, and all of the weight of the bomb was basically those flechettes, not the explosive.
Right.
So it's been a long time since I read the book, but as I remember in the book, it matched the bottom of the blimp. Like, it was smooth. They didn't even notice it was there. So he had done it in stealth, as I remembered. I could be wrong on the book. It's, like I said, it's been a long time, but I just remember it not being such a big deal about attaching the bomb, and it was still going to be effective.
I thought once the helicopter got up, it got a lot better. And what I really loved on that scene, though, was when Kabakov is hanging on to the hook with the idea of that somehow we're going to hook this helicopter onto a blimp. They keep going back and forth of will he or won't he get this thing hooked and will he still live? Overall, it's a great climactic scene because they had real reactions of people in the stadium with real football players and the real Goodyear blimp. All these little elements made it memorable, right?
I would agree. Yeah, that was memorable for sure.
Okay, Matt, it is time. Did it groove through the decades or did it skip a beat?
Well, I'm going to have to give you a two-part answer for that. And maybe I'm going to equivocate a little bit. I think if you view this film within the idea of the time frame and what was happening politically and with people and things that had happened, it was probably a pretty hard-hitting film at the time. My personal opinion is when you look at it now, it's super long. It's a little bit involved in details that we don't really care about for such a long film. So my personal opinion is if you look at it for sort of historical and kind of what were people watching in 1977, I think, yeah, it's a hit. It definitely is good for that. If you're looking for something that's a thrilling movie that'd be great to watch right now and would entertain, I think it skips a beat.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I think Matt and I are going to end up on separate sides of the fence today on this one, and that's okay. Despite the pacing, I think that this is a film that people would still enjoy watching today. The corporate participation, the gradual unveiling of what this weapon is and what it does. I liked Bruce Dern's performance in it. I thought it was really good. And the John Williams score just all combined to make this a fun watch. So for me, this film is a thriller that still hustles. I know we ended up on opposite sides of the fence, but that's what makes podcasts interesting. So thank you so much, though, for watching this film again and joining me to talk about it.
As always, I'm happy to do it.
So listener, how about you? Did you see Black Sunday, and what did you think about it? Or if you watch it after listening, please tell us about it. You can do that by emailing us at podcast@cinematicflashback.com or leave a comment on our Facebook page, the Cinematic Flashback Podcast. You can also find us on X at the handle @Back270sMovies. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. The best way you can share this show is to recommend us to your friends. We deeply appreciate the feedback that we have been receiving, so just keep it coming. Also, we are trying to build this show, and we would deeply appreciate a review on the platform you are listening to. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars so that we can feed the algorithm and reach more listeners. So join us next time as we take the Wayback Machine to the 70s to explore another film from that decade. Matt, I have heard a little bit about Mossad and a little bit about Black September. Was there anything you had to fill in on that?
Okay, sounds good. Is there anything I can help you with? Let me know if you have any questions, need information, or just want to chat.
Sorry. You'll have to do it again. I don't know how it even heard it.
Hey, Google.
It shouldn't hear it.